Cornish Memorial Civil War here in Key. Sidney Cornish, he was the most, one of the most. Alright, the next intersection we're heading through is Petronia Street. Petronia Street is the heart of Bahama Village. You'll find that we have a great many female street names here in Key West, mostly children or siblings of one of our Civil War court here for Conch in the name of Key West, Florida. Alright, for this next intersection on the left, you'll see a long red brick wall. Behind the wall is the former residence of...
Yeah, that's a good spot. Oh, look at how crowded it is now.
Ernest Hemingway.
Damn.
In Key West
I bet we got in there early.
With his second wife, Pauline.
The key is get out early.
Ernest Hemingway house here on our left. Now the red brick wall on the left said to have been built by Hemingway's own two hands by the looks of it. He did it when he was home from Slappy Joe's. On our right, this is the Key West Lighthouse. 87 steps to that lighthouse.
87 steps.
The other one do that one. I don't know, a lot. There's a lot of steps.
On our right, the Key West.
This is also Kington.
Is it?
Yeah. It was, at least when we were here last.
Key West Keeper's Quarters.
Yeah.
If it looks like there are two front doors, you are right. There are. Key West had to hire two families in order to keep that lighthouse going. Alright, we are entering Gatto Village, named for renowned cigar manufacturer Eduardo Gatto. At one time there were 166 cigar factories on this tiny little island. Eduardo Gatto wanted to make sure that his employees remained happy and working for him. How did he do that? He built them a house. Now there is a pretty nice boss. Folks, we are entering Gatto Village, and on this island there are 3 Navy bases on this island. Navy arrived here in 1823 by Commodore Porter of the U.S. Navy. Porter arrived here in 1823 by Commodore Porter. Commodore Porter arrived here to combat the burgeoning problem of piracy in the Florida Keys. Porter arrived here to fight the pirates of the Caribbean.
Johnny Depp.
Coming up here on our right, you'll see a very sturdy-looking black metal fence. Behind the black metal fence is the Truman Annex of our Naval Air Station. Now, the Naval Air Station is really located 7 miles up the Keys on Boca Chica Key. It is a Top Gun flight school. They trained fighter pilots to land fighter jets on aircraft carriers. And folks, when they are out on maneuvers, you know it. The skies over Key West get really quite thunderous. Alright folks, once we reach the end of this block, at the end on our right you'll see what we here on this island affectionately call the southernmost, most ignored stop sign. Nobody ever stops for it, they're looking straight ahead. They just keep on going, but looking through the black metal fence on the right, you might be able to make out an enormous satellite dish. There are a lot of Navy communications coming out of the south of the island of Key West.
So we're close to this.
And
We
here
can walk over here first thing in the morning and take an actual
We are
picture.
at the southernmost point in the continental United States. You may have seen a news article from early New Year's Day a couple of years ago now.
Set
A
it on
couple of
fire.
knuckleheads in town here decided they were going to set a Christmas tree on fire right there at the concrete buoy.
Look at the line.
It was completely scorched January 1st and 2nd. January 3rd, he got a new paint job. It's never looked better. Folks, at the moment, we are 90 miles to Cuba. We are also 130 miles from the closest Walmart. You are now closer to a foreign country than you are to a Walmart. You cannot usually say that. end of this block on our right, you see this beautiful red, tall, Queen Anne style home. These days, it is a hotel. Used to be a private residence. On our right is the southernmost house. Built in 1896 by federal judge J. Vining Harris and his wife Florida Curry Harris. Now the Harrises loved to entertain. They built the whole second floor as one gigantic ballroom. They, however, did not care for any overnight guests. They built the house with one bedroom for themselves.
Up there? I want to go up there.
They did solve this problem. They built 3 guest houses behind us on our left, complete with servants' quarters out back. Turning on to world-famous Duval Street, looking to our left, look at this beautiful house. Dates from 1885, one of my absolute favorite houses on this island. This house was built for Eduardo Gatto Jr. by renowned cigar manufacturer Eduardo Gatto Sr. Now the house used to be located on the lot here on our right. But Eduardo Gatto Jr. did not like how the lights hit the terrace in the morning, so under mule power he had it hauled across the street, turned 90 degrees. You notice it is house number 1327, now the only odd-numbered house on the even side of Duval Street.
I love stories like that.
Favorite attraction, that's the Key West Butterfly and Nature Conservatory. Inside the large glass atrium off the back, there are hundreds of free-flying butterflies, also 20 species of exotic birds. 2 of them are a mated pair of pink flamingos. Their names are Red and Scarlet. That atrium is open every day till 4:30. Their gift shop open every day till 5:30. It is equally as beautiful. All right, through this intersection we are entering what always has been, what still remains to be, quite a Cuban neighborhood on this island. In the mid-1800s, this island also had a huge influx of Cuban immigrants came here to work in our cigar manufacturing industry. That industry began here in the year 1824 when an Englishman by the name of William Wall got shipwrecked here. Took a look around, realized he could create an industry. He started to import Cuban tobacco. Not only the tobacco, he imported people who could roll that tobacco into cigars. That industry was in full swing here until the Great Fire of 1886. You'll hear about that fire a few times along your tour. That fire destroyed most of our cigar factories. Hiding behind the delivery truck here on the legacy of awarding that reads La Di Da. These days, the La Di Da is a hotel and a cabaret. Cabaret on the second floor, they do drag shows up there nightly. But La Di Da really stands for La Terrazza de Marti, the Terrace of Marti. Cuban patriot Jose Marti gave rallying speeches for his followers from that second-story balcony. Jose Marti was known as the George Washington of Cuban independence. 2 twin white buildings on our left, that is the old Cuban Social Club, established here in the year 1900. As I mentioned, yes, in the mid-1800s, this island had a huge influx of Cuban immigrants. They came here to work in our cigar manufacturing industry. They established the Cuban Social Club. Inside the social club, they had access to health care, educational programs, and certainly, yes, social events. They say the greatest dances in Key West were on the second floor of the Cuban Social Club. That structure there really dates from the year 1984. The original structure was burned down in 1983, but the grandsons of the original architect were able to be contacted. They were able to locate the original blueprints. We were able to rebuild the Cuban Social Club to its exact original specifications. All right, folks, in a moment we're going to turn on to Truman Avenue, of course, named for President Harry S. Truman.
Oh.
Again, 11 working vacations of his presidency here, spent here in Key West. We have a number of streets here named for presidents and visitors.
Somebody's shoe and whatever up there.
Eisenhower and Roosevelt.
Whatever.
President Kennedy visited Key West twice. Once during the Bay of Pigs invasion, once
Walking
during
around with
the
the
Cuban
speaker.
Missile Crisis. All right, turning on to Truman Avenue. Now we do have this one block in front of us to traverse before we see our next site. But on our following block past the next stoplight, looking to the right, you will see a long stone wall. And behind the stone wall is a complex of buildings known as the Basilica of St. Mary, Star of the Sea.
It's a good spot.
Star of the Sea.
We're there now.
Well, our
Yeah, it's a
Cuban
good
neighbors
spot.
think of the island of Key West as
Yeah,
Stellar.
oh, you can see it. It's completely redone.
Star of
It's
the
gorgeous.
Sea. Behind the stone wall, you'll see a school, a convent, and of course the basilica all the way at the end of the next block.
So here's the
Historically
steakhouse.
significant, the basilica's always been
That was
for
my
us
first
here.
choice for
The
dinner.
basilica was the first to establish
Kinda
a
boring.
school for black children here in the Florida Keys. Still a school on the property. Of course, these days it is all welcome. There is a convent as well. And during the Spanish-American War, the Mother Superior at the time offered the military the use of the convent as a convent hospital. Right there, that school, through the trees you see at the convent, we'll see the basilica at the end of the block. Now, in 1919, there was a sister living in the convent here. Her name was Sister Louise Gabrielle. Sister Louise had suffered through 3 very devastating hurricanes in her time here, and well, she wanted to do something. So looking to our right, all the way to the back of the property, there is Sister Louise Gabriel's prayer grotto, still standing after 100 years. With each coral wand she placed on that grotto, she said a little prayer that Key West would never again suffer the devastation of a major hurricane. She finished that grotto in 1922.
Yeah, we've heard that story before.
And since 1919, no eye of a major hurricane has passed over the city of Key West. Is that coincidence? Is that divine intervention? I will let you decide. Now, folks, just in case you may have already forgot, you're now riding the world-famous Contour train, running in the streets of Key West, Florida since the year 1958. The Contour train was founded by Bill and Olive Kroll. Bill and Olive Kroll were the managers of the Key West Aquarium here for 10 years. Guess what there's that Graham used to ask all the time? Other sightseeing opportunities. Not being very many, they founded the Contour train. January 18th of 1958, engine number 97 started riding down the streets of Key West, Florida. In 1971, the Krolls decided to sell and travel the world. We are now owned and operated by Historic Tours of America, our nation's storyteller. On our right, you see this stone building. This is the old antique firehouse museum. Once we're in front, look above the tall arch doorways, you'll see the number 3, that is fire station number 3, one of the oldest in South Florida. Now folks, they started to build this building in 1907. It did not open as a firehouse until 1908 because the first one burned down. It's now an antique firehouse museum, fun for the kids to climb around the antique fire equipment inside. All right, folks, for the next 2 blocks, I have a quiet zone. Feel free to talk amongst yourselves. I'll be back with you in 2 blocks.
Another quiet zone. These are just where all the Karens live.
Of course, there's tonight, there's a whole dance 20 minutes. Dance. But I'm here with like, I'm getting now there, a lot of people are showing up and like, doing that at night.
But
I got the dance with.
got the crow's nest.
They're all, oh, yeah, I can't wait for that. You know, they're all going out to dinner beforehand. I know there's a country bar.
That's perfect. Glad we got on this one. No one even checked their ticket. That's the funny part. They just walked up.
All right, everyone, and we are back. Thanks so much for bearing with us. That neighborhood doesn't like me. Now, folks, the island of Key craft has been known by a few different names over the course of history. Back in 1522, when the original Spanish explorers landed on this island, of course they were exploring with Ponce de Leon, searching for the legendary Fountain of Youth. The Spanish found this island covered in human bones. They were most likely the bones of fallen warriors from the Native American tribes that lived in this area at the time. So the Spanish called this island Cayo Hueso. Cayo meaning island and Hueso meaning bones, so it was Bone Island, or Island of Bones.
Now it
And
still
over
is just a
time,
different meaning.
Cayo Hueso got corrupted into Key West. Now folks, through this intersection we will be approaching a very important thoroughfare for us here on this island. We will be approaching Flagler Avenue.
Yes.
It is named for Henry Flagler. Henry Flagler was instrumental in making Key West the place
What?
that it is even for us
I know.
here today. Henry Flagler was business partners of John D. Rockefeller. Together they started Standard Oil, these days known a little better as ExxonMobil. Now, Flagler took the fortune that he made from that oil company and he built a
Dude, it's
railroad.
so much
It's called the
It's like
East
just
Coast
insane
Railroad.
money they
It
make.
was initially extended from Jacksonville to Miami. It ultimately was extended all the way down here to Key West. No, that railroad no longer exists for us here today. You'll hear about what happened to the railroad along your tour. But all along this railroad, Henry Flagler wanted first-rate accommodation for his rail passengers. Here on our right is the most recent. This is the Casa Marina Resort and Hotel. Casa Marina meaning house by the sea. It opened on New Year's Eve of 1920. And when the Conch Marina first opened, room rates were outrageous. They were $8 to $12 a night. But that included 3 meals, a little consolation there, I suppose.
That's hilarious.
See, there's a beach here.
Yep. This beach.
Now, folks, the beach that we are now facing is one of the few beaches that we do actually have here on this island. This is Clarence Higgs Memorial Beach. Higgs was a local politician that named the beach in honor of him. And now the body of water on our right, we call the Atlantic Ocean, but technically it's not. These are the Florida Straits, or Straits of Florida. They extend 170 miles between Miami and the Dry Tortugas, 90 miles between Key West and the island nation of Cuba to our right. Now, there's a little bit of wind today, folks, and the water is a bit choppy, but normally looking out on this huge body of water is like looking at a flat pane of glass, not even a single ripple out there. And the reason for this, about 5 miles off the coast, there is a coral reef. It's the 3rd largest coral reef in the world. Second largest one is in Belize. The largest, of course, the Great Barrier Reef in Australia. Now that coral reef up there acts as a barrier as well, and it stops all wave activity. So because of that, we create no natural sand here. No surf, no sand. All the sand that you find on our beaches is imported. Yep, usually comes from either the Bahamas or the Panhandle of Florida. Red brick structure on our right is one of 3 Civil War forts on this island. This is the Fort West Martello Tower, these days the home of the Key West Garden Club. That fort dates from the 1850s and 1860s. However, it was never actually completed. It was deemed obsolete by the end of the Civil War due to the invention of rifle cannons. That's why now it looks a little beaten up. It was purposefully built 1.5 miles away from Fort Zachary Taylor. 1.5 miles is the approximate distance a cannonball can fly. So when they decided not to use it as a fort, they decided to use it for target practice. Shot some cannonballs at it, beat it up a bit. Now that
That's hilarious.
coral reef out there that I just mentioned is also responsible for an incredible industry we had here during the 17 and 1800s. This industry was known as shipwrecking. During those days, the entire beach area at this end of the island would have been lined with very tall wooden watchtowers. At the top of those towers, there would have been people watching to see if and when a wooden cargo ship got wrecked on that coral reef. Now, this is something that happened often enough, at least once a week or so. A wooden cargo ship is no match for a coral reef. Now, when this happened, the people on top of those towers would call out the call, "Wreck ashore!" This call would be passed from one tower to the next, finally making its way into the city. Soon, everybody would have realized that we had indeed had a shipwreck. Well, at that point, it became a race. First priority certainly would be to save any survivors from that shipwreck. But next, the first boat captain to arrive at the wreck site was known as the wreck captain. The wreck captain was entitled to the largest portion of proceeds from the auction of salvaged shipwrecked goods. The rest of the proceeds from that auction were then just split among the people of Key West. So, just by living here, you became very wealthy by this industry known as shipwrecking. 17 and 1800s, Key West was one of the wealthiest cities in the United States for
What do you do
this
with the
reason.
people on the boat? Just kill them?
Luckily or not so luckily, depending on how you wish to look at it, shipwrecking did end. That coral reef got better mapped out. There were better shipping charts. Well, that and the fact that there were many lawsuits at the time claiming that shipwrecking was essentially legalized piracy, shipwrecking did end. That coral reef out there
Oh, it's a weather forecast.
It's a Dairy Queen.
ended our shipwrecking industry as well. Folks, we are now traveling along White Street. At one time, White Street was the outer boundary of the island of Key West. Everything here on our right. Folks, this is all landfill. This used to be very shallow swampland, but when the Navy arrived here in the 40s, they wanted more land to build on, so they started dredging the water off the keys, came up with a substance they called marl. It was a combination of limestone, coral, sand, even seashell. They used this marl as landfill, more land to build on. That's why what we call here on our right, folks, Newtown, Key West. It is relatively new. Alright, through this next intersection, entering yet another very Cuban neighborhood on this island, and looking to our left with the red and white shirt on, this is a very popular Cuban Cuban coffee shop on this island. That is Sandy's Cafe, and look at the sign up front. They say that that is the home of the original Cuban sandwich. Give the Cuban sandwich a try while you are here. It is truly delicious. I also do suggest, yes, giving our Cuban coffee a try. I won't say it's not strong. It really very much is. My favorite is Cafe con leche, the coffee with steamed milk. Alright, through this intersection, which is Truman Avenue one more time, looking to our left, look at this row of houses, 5 or 6 of them in a row. They all look the exact same. We call these houses shotgun houses. They were originally built for Cuban cigar workers. All the rooms inside are connected by one common corridor. The front doors and the back doors line up perfectly. It said if you were to shoot a shotgun down that hallway, you would not hit a thing. They were built that way for ventilation purposes. Something else you notice about our houses here in Old Town Key West, look up at the roofs. You notice that they are all made of metal, and there are a couple of reasons for that. Folks, we are on an island surrounded by salt water. So originally, the only available fresh drinking water here was collected rainwater. Those metal roofs really facilitated the collection of that rainwater for drinking. You notice many houses here in Old Town still have the gutters on the side of the house. Well, those gutters used to lead to very large cisterns all the way out back to collect that rainwater for drinking. Well, in the 1940s, Navy personnel here increased to 15,000. They even decided, wow, we need a whole lot more fresh drinking water. So the Navy built a 120-mile water pipeline down here to Key West from mainland Florida. That water pipeline is still how Key West gets all of its fresh drinking water. Thank you, Navy. Now, back to those metal roofs. You'll also notice our houses here in Old Town are really quite close together. 5, 6, maybe 7 feet between our houses at most. Well, that proved to be very problematic during the Great Fire of 1886. Now, certainly the roofs were originally made of wood. Well, a fire broke out at 10 a.m. on March 30th of 1886. That fire burned for 12 hours straight. It destroyed 50% of the seaport area of Key West. Well, after that fire, the city then mandated all roofs needed to be made of metal. If a fire were ever to break out again, that fire would not spread nearly as quickly, hence our metal roofs here in Old Town. And looking to our left, yes, here we are at our Key West Cemetery. And similar to cemeteries you may have seen if you ever did visit the city of New Orleans, yep, all of our crypts are above ground, and there are a couple of reasons for that. Folks, we are on a chunk of coal and limestone. Really not so easy to blast into that coal and limestone to bury somebody. Easier to build an above-ground crypt. Actually quite beautiful if you ask me.